2 weeks ago, my wife went to visit our daughter and her new husband. I decided to surprise them and drove there myself. But as I reached their front door, the neighbor ran toward me, yelling, "Wait, there is something you need to know." 10 minutes later, the police were on the scene. Look, I'm not saying I'm husband of the year or anything, but 2 weeks ago I genuinely thought I was pulling off something straight out of one of those cheesy romantic comedies my wife used to make me watch on Sunday nights. You know the ones where the guy shows up unexpectedly with flowers or a puppy, and everyone cries happy tears while some acoustic guitar plays in the background. Yeah, that was supposed to be me. Spoiler alert, I'm an idiot. So here's how it went down. My wife Marlene, beautiful woman, been married to her for 23 years, thought I knew her pretty damn well. Tells me she's planning to spend the weekend with our daughter Riley and Riley's new husband Blake. Now, Riley got hitched about 8 months ago to this guy Blake, who's nice enough I guess, though he is one of those beards that looks like it requires a YouTube tutorial and premium oils. They'd just bought their first house together, one of those cookie-cutter suburban numbers about 3 hours away, and Marlene had been dying to see how they'd decorated it. Women and their throw pillows, am I right? Anyway, when Marlene mentioned the trip, I did what any supportive husband would do. I said, "Sure, honey, have a great time, drive safe, and hey, if Riley makes that pot roast she's been bragging about, bring me back some leftovers in a Tupperware." I even kissed her on the forehead like I was Ward Cleaver or some wholesome garbage like that. She smiled, told me I was sweet, and said she'd probably be gone from Friday through Sunday. Standard girls' weekend stuff. I told her I'd hold down the fort, maybe finally clean out the garage, watch some basketball, live that bachelor life for 72 hours. But here's the thing, and this is where my galaxy brain thinking comes in. I had a different plan. See, about a month before all this, Riley had been dropping hints the size of billboard advertisements about this old trunk of hers that was collecting dust in our attic. You know those big vintage wooden trunks that people used to take on steamships? Yeah, one of those. She'd stored all her childhood stuff in it. Old dolls, yearbooks, some truly horrifying poetry from her emo phase that I'm pretty sure violated the Geneva Convention. She kept saying how much she wanted it for her new house, how it would look so aesthetic in her guest bedroom, whatever the hell that means. I swear, kids these days and their interior design Instagram accounts. So I figured, you know what? I'm gonna be the hero dad. I'm gonna take Friday off work, tell my boss I've got a dentist appointment or my back's acting up or whatever excuse middle-aged guys use. And I'm gonna load up that trunk in my pickup and drive it down to Riley's place as a surprise. I'd show up right when Marlene was there. We'd all have this beautiful family moment, maybe order some pizza, and I'd drive back Saturday feeling like father of the damn year. They'd probably post about it on Facebook with a bunch of heart emojis and hashtags. I might even get a world's best dad mug out of the deal. Thursday night, I loaded that trunk into the bed of my F-150 like I was preparing for some kind of HGTV mission. The thing weighed about as much as a baby elephant, and I definitely pulled something in my lower back hoisting it up there. But did I complain? No, sir. I strapped it down with bungee cords, double-checked the address Riley had texted me months ago, and set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I was pumped. I felt like I was planning a heist, except instead of stealing diamonds, I was delivering nostalgic junk and family bonding. Friday morning rolled around, and I was on the road by 7. 3 hours of highway driving stretched out in front of me like a ribbon of asphalt destiny. I stopped at a gas station, grabbed one of those oversized coffees that's basically liquid diabetes, and a breakfast sandwich that tasted like it had been sitting under a heat lamp since the Reagan administration. I didn't care. I was on a mission. I cranked up the classic rock station, because nothing says road trip like singing terribly off-key to Journey in Boston. And I belted out Don't Stop Believin' like I was auditioning for some sad, middle-aged version of American Idol. My voice cracked on the high notes. The trucker in the next lane looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I waved at him anyway. During that drive, I had the whole thing choreographed in my head. I'd pull up to Riley's place, park in the driveway all casual-like, and walk up to the front door. Maybe I'd knock. Maybe I'd just walk in. We're family, right? And then I'd deliver my line. Something smooth like, "Guess who missed you guys?" Or "Special delivery for the newlyweds." Marlene would gasp, Riley would squeal, Blake would probably do that bro handshake thing guys do, and we'd all laugh about what a thoughtful surprise it was. Maybe Riley would make coffee. Maybe we'd sit on their new patio furniture that they definitely overpaid for and talk about life. It was going to be perfect. I even stopped about an hour outside their town to grab flowers from one of those grocery stores that smells like rotisserie chicken and floor cleaner. Nothing fancy, just a bouquet of mixed colors that said, "Hey, I'm a guy who tried." The cashier, a teenager with approximately 17 nose rings, looked at me like I was the most boring human she'd ever encountered. I didn't care. I was bringing joy, damn it. As I got closer to Riley's neighborhood, I started feeling that nervous, excited energy you get before good surprises. You know that feeling? Like when you're a kid on Christmas morning, or when you're about to propose, or when you find $20 in your old jacket pocket. My palms were a little sweaty on the steering wheel. I checked my hair in the rearview mirror, still got most of it, thank God, and practiced my smile. I wanted to look surprised to see them, even though obviously I wasn't, because I'd driven 3 hours specifically for this moment. The GPS told me I was 2 minutes away. I turned onto their street, Maple something or other, very quaint, very white picket fence America. And I could see their house up ahead. It looked exactly like the pictures Riley had sent. Pale blue siding, black shutters, little garden gnomes that Blake probably hated, but let Riley put out anyway, because that's what marriage is. The sun was starting to set, casting this golden hour glow over everything like God himself was Instagram filtering my surprise visit. I pulled into the driveway, put the truck in park, and sat there for just a second, soaking it all in. This was it. The moment I'd been planning. The moment that was supposed to prove I was still a good dad, a good husband, a guy who cared enough to drive 3 hours with a trunk full of childhood memories. I grabbed the flowers off the passenger seat, checked my teeth in the mirror one more time. No spinach. We're good. And opened the truck door. That's when things stopped being a Hallmark movie and started being whatever the opposite of a Hallmark movie is. A horror film, maybe. Or one of those reality shows where everyone ends up screaming and throwing drinks. Because as I stepped out of my truck, feeling like the champion of family surprises, I heard a voice that would change absolutely everything. Wait, don't go in there. I'm not gonna lie. When I heard someone yelling at me from across a pristine suburban lawn at sunset, my first instinct was to assume I'd accidentally parked in front of the wrong house. You know how these cookie-cutter neighborhoods are, right? Every house looks like it was designed by the same architect who got really excited about beige and then just copy-pasted the same blueprint 40 times. For a split second, I genuinely thought maybe I'd pulled into some random person's driveway and was about to get chewed out by an angry homeowner who takes their property lines way too seriously. But nope, the voice was coming from next door, Riley's actual next-door neighbor, and it belonged to this older lady who was currently sprinting across her yard like she was competing in some kind of senior citizen Olympics. I'm talking full-on sprint mode, which was impressive considering she was wearing fuzzy pink slippers and a bathrobe that had seen better days. Her gray hair was up in those little roller things that women used to wear in old sitcoms, and her face had this expression that was somewhere between panic and, "I've been waiting my whole life to deliver this news." Wait, stop, don't go in there. She kept shouting, waving her arms like she was trying to flag down a helicopter. She nearly tripped over one of Riley's decorative garden borders. You know, those little plastic fence things that serve absolutely no purpose except to make you feel like your yard has sections. I stood there frozen, one foot still in my truck, the other on the driveway, holding my gas station flowers like an idiot, trying to process what the hell was happening. My brain immediately went to worst-case scenarios. Maybe there was a gas leak. Maybe a bear had broken in. Though we weren't exactly in bear country. But hey, stranger things have happened. Maybe Blake had finally attempted to use power tools unsupervised, and the house was about to explode. Or maybe this lady was just one of those neighbors, you know the type. The ones who monitor everyone's business like it's their job, who know exactly when you put your trash cans out, and will absolutely mention it if you're 15 minutes early. She reached me before I could make a decision about whether to run inside or back to my truck. This woman, I'd later learn her name was Mrs. Kemp, and she was 73 years old with the energy of someone half her age, grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into my jacket sleeve like she was physically preventing me from walking toward the house. Her eyes were huge, like she'd just witnessed a murder or found out that the earth was flat or something equally earth-shattering. "You need to know something before you walk in there," she said, breathing hard from her sprint. Up close, I could smell her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned, like my grandmother used to wear. It mixed with the scent of whatever candles she'd been burning in her house, creating this weird aromatic cocktail of lavender and panic. I let out this nervous laugh, the kind you do when you're not sure if someone's joking or having a medical emergency. Okay, well, you're freaking me out a little bit here, I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was starting to beat faster. Let me guess, Blake finally learned how to use the grill without calling the fire department? Or did Riley adopt another cat without telling anyone? See, Riley had this habit of collecting strays. We'd had this ongoing family joke about it. So part of me, the optimistic, stupid part, thought maybe this was about something harmless. Mrs. Kemp's face didn't change. If anything, she looked more serious. She glanced back at Riley's house, then at me, then back at the house, like she was checking to make sure we weren't being watched. It's not about your daughter, she said, and her voice dropped to this low, grave tone that people use when they're about to tell you someone died. It's about your wife. The flowers suddenly felt heavy in my hand. My wife? Marlene? What about her? Mrs. Kemp squeezed my arm tighter. I was definitely going to have a bruise there tomorrow. She's not here to visit your daughter, she said, and then she paused like she was in some kind of soap opera, waiting for the dramatic music to kick in. She's here with another man. You know that feeling when someone says something so ridiculous that your brain just kind of short-circuits? Like when someone tells you they don't like pizza or that they think the Earth is only 6,000 years old. That's exactly what happened. I stood there, mouth probably hanging open like a dead fish, trying to process the words that had just come out of this bathrobe-wearing stranger's mouth. She's here with another man. The sentence didn't even make sense. It was like she'd told me in Swedish or something. I'm sorry, what? I managed to say, and I heard my own voice crack a little. The smile I'd been wearing, the dopey, excited, surprise visit smile, slid off my face so fast it probably left skid marks. What do you mean, another man? Like a contractor? A real estate agent? What are you talking about? Mrs. Kemp's expression shifted from panic to sympathy, which was somehow worse. Panic I could handle. Sympathy meant something was actually, genuinely wrong. A man, she repeated, slower this time, like I was hard of hearing or particularly dense. Not your son-in-law. Not a relative. A man she's been staying here with. Your daughter and Blake haven't been home all week. I thought you knew. I thought. She stopped herself, seemed to realize something. Oh God, you didn't know, did you? The driveway felt like it was tilting. I looked down at the flowers in my hand. Cheap mixed bouquet from a grocery store, already wilting a little bit, and suddenly they seemed like the dumbest purchase in human history. My mouth was dry. My tongue felt like sandpaper. That's impossible, I said, but even as the words came out, I knew they sounded weak. Unconvincing. Marlene's here to see Riley. They're having a girls' weekend. She told me. Come inside. Mrs. Kemp interrupted, tugging on my arm now, pulling me toward her house instead of Riley's. Come inside, dear. You'll want to sit down for this. I'll make you some tea. Or something stronger. Do you drink? I have bourbon. My late husband's bourbon. You look like you need bourbon. I should have run. I should have gotten back in my truck, thrown it in reverse, and driven those 3 hours back home while pretending this conversation never happened. I should have at least walked up to Riley's door and knocked, confirmed things with my own eyes before listening to some neighbor I'd never even met before. But I didn't do any of those things. Because deep down, in that awful gut-feeling place where you know things before your brain wants to admit them, I knew Mrs. Kemp was telling me the truth. So I followed her. I let this 73-year-old woman in a bathrobe and slippers lead me across her lawn, up her porch steps, and into her house that smelled like mothballs and cinnamon candles and the kind of old-person potpourri you can't buy anymore. I followed her like an idiot in one of those horror movies who hears a strange noise in the basement and decides to investigate instead of leaving. I followed her because the alternative, walking into Riley's house and confirming what I already somehow knew, was too terrifying to face just yet. And that's how my perfect surprise visit turned into the worst day of my entire life. Mrs. Kemp's living room looked exactly like you'd expect a 73-year-old woman's living room to look. We're talking doilies on every surface, approximately 4,000 framed photos of grandchildren on the mantel, one of those ancient floral couches that's probably older than I am and makes that crunching sound when you sit on it, and enough decorative pillows to open a small boutique. The whole place smelled like a Bath and Body Works exploded in a nursing home. Cinnamon candles burning on the coffee table, some kind of apple-scented air freshener plugging into the wall, and underneath it all, that distinct old house smell of mothballs and thyme. She pointed to the couch, floral pattern, naturally, with cabbage roses the size of dinner plates, and I sat down like an obedient child being sent to the principal's office. The cushions wheezed under my weight. I was still holding those stupid gas station flowers, and I finally just dropped them on the coffee table next to a bowl of those strawberry candies that every grandmother in America apparently has a lifetime supply of. My hands were shaking a little bit. Mrs. Kemp noticed. "I'm going to make you some tea," she announced, already shuffling toward what I assumed was the kitchen. "Unless you want that bourbon? I'm telling you, my Harold's bourbon is the good stuff. 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle. He was saving it for a special occasion, but he died before he could drink it, so now I just offer it to people in crisis." "Are you in crisis?" "You look like you're in crisis." "I don't even know yet," I said honestly, and my voice sounded weird, hollow and far away, like I was hearing myself through a phone. Can you just tell me what you're talking about?" "About my wife? Because I'm really hoping this is some kind of misunderstanding, like maybe you saw someone who looks like Marlene, or maybe." Mrs. Kemp stopped in the kitchen doorway and turned around. Her face had that look that people get when they're about to deliver bad news and they know it's going to hurt. "Honey, I've lived next door to your daughter for 8 months. I've met your wife 3 times. I know what she looks like. And I'm telling you, she's been at that house since Wednesday with a man who is definitely not you and definitely not Blake." "Wednesday? That was 2 days ago." Marlene had told me she was leaving Friday morning, which meant she'd lied about when she was even going. I felt something cold settle into my stomach, like I'd swallowed ice. "Describe him," I said, and I don't know why that was my first question, but it was. "The guy? What does he look like?" Mrs. Kemp came back into the living room, forget the tea, apparently, and sat down in an armchair across from me that matched the couch. She folded her hands in her lap, like she was about to give testimony in court. Tall, maybe 6 feet. Gray hair, very distinguished looking. Nice car. One of those luxury SUVs, a Lexus I think. He dresses well. Expensive clothes. The kind of man who probably smells like cologne you can't buy at Target, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what she meant. And I also knew, with absolute certainty, who she was describing. Gregory. Gregory from Marlene's book club. Gregory who worked in finance and had just gotten divorced last year. Gregory who Marlene had mentioned maybe 3 or 4 times in the last few months. Always casually, always in passing. "Oh, Gregory recommended this novel. Gregory thinks we should try that new restaurant. Gregory says the market's going to crash." Gregory, who I'd never met, but had somehow become a recurring character in my wife's conversations. "Son of a bitch," I whispered, and Mrs. Kemp nodded sympathetically like I'd just solved a really depressing puzzle. "I saw them arrive together Wednesday afternoon," she continued, and now that she'd started, it was like she couldn't stop. This woman had been sitting on this information for 2 days, probably dying to tell someone. They had suitcases. They were laughing. He put his hand on the small of her back when they walked to the door. I thought maybe I was mistaken at first, thought maybe it was innocent, but then I didn't see them leave. Not Wednesday night, not Thursday, not this morning. The bedroom light's been on at night. I saw them through the kitchen window yesterday, making breakfast together. And honey, I don't want to be indelicate, but the way he was looking at her wasn't the way you look at your friends. Mother, if you catch my drift. I caught her drift. I caught it so hard I thought I might throw up on her cabbage rose couch. My brain was doing this thing where it was trying to rewrite the last few months, looking for clues I'd missed. Had Marlene been distant? Had she been different? We'd had sex maybe twice in the last 6 weeks, which wasn't abnormal for a couple married as long as we'd been, but now I was wondering if that was a red flag I'd just ignored. She'd been on her phone more. She'd joined that stupid book club. She'd started going to the gym at weird times. Oh God, the gym. How many times had she said she was going to the gym? "Where's Riley?" I asked suddenly. "Where's my daughter? Does she know about this?" Mrs. Kemp shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Your daughter and Blake left Monday morning. I saw them loading up their car. Looked like they were going on a trip. Blake mentioned something about visiting his parents in Colorado for the week. They won't be back until Sunday. So Riley and Blake were gone. And Marlene had shown up 2 days later with Gregory. Which meant what exactly? That my wife had planned this. That she'd asked Riley when the house would be empty, so she could use it as some kind of cheap affair hotel? That my daughter knew and had helped her? No, that couldn't be right. Riley wouldn't do that. She was my little girl. She was. But even as I tried to convince myself, I remembered something. Last week, Riley had called me. We'd talked for maybe 10 minutes about nothing important. Her new job, Blake's fantasy football league, whether I'd fixed the leak in the bathroom yet. And at the end of the call, she'd said something weird. She'd said, "Dad, I hope you know Mom really does love you." It had struck me as odd at the time, kind of random and overly sentimental, but I'd brushed it off. Now it felt like a confession, like she'd been trying to ease her guilt. "I need to call the police," I said, standing up so fast I almost knocked over the candy bowl. My head was spinning. My hands were still shaking. "I need to. Someone's trespassing in my daughter's house. That's breaking and entering, right? Or at least unauthorized entry. I can report that. I can." "Honey, are you sure that's the best?" Mrs. Kemp started, but I was already pulling out my phone. "Listen, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why would you call the cops on your own wife? Why wouldn't you just march over there and confront her yourself like a normal person?" And you'd be right. That would have been the rational thing to do, the normal thing. But in that moment, standing in a stranger's living room that smelled like dead husband bourbon and cinnamon regret, I wasn't thinking rationally. I was thinking about how I'd driven 3 hours with a trunk full of childhood memories. I was thinking about how I'd practiced my surprised face in the mirror. I was thinking about those stupid gas station flowers wilting on the coffee table. And I wanted someone official to see this. I wanted witnesses. I wanted my wife to have to explain herself to someone in uniform. So I dialed 911. And when the dispatcher answered, way too cheerful, like she was working at a Starbucks instead of an emergency line, I said the dumbest thing I've ever said in my entire life. "Hi. Yes, I need to report unauthorized guests in my daughter's home. They're trespassing. They're armed." "Armed with what, sir?" the dispatcher asked, suddenly serious. I paused, looked at Mrs. Kemp, who was staring at me with her mouth open, looked out the window at Riley's house, where my wife was presumably still cozied up with Gregory, the finance guy. "Armed with charm and bad decisions," I said. Mrs. Kemp burst out laughing. The dispatcher didn't. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights were painting the suburban sunset, and I realized my surprise visit had officially become a crime scene. You know what's surreal? Watching 2 police cruisers pull up to your daughter's adorable suburban house while you stand on the neighbor's lawn holding wilted flowers and questioning every life decision you've ever made. The lights weren't blaring. Thank God for small mercies. But they were definitely visible, casting these alternating red and blue shadows across Riley's perfect hedges and her stupid garden gnomes. I could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Great. My family drama was about to become the neighborhood's dinner conversation for the next 6 months. The cops who got out of their vehicles looked exactly like cops from a TV show. One older guy with a mustache that had probably been regulation cool in 1987, and one younger officer who looked like he'd graduated from the academy approximately 15 minutes ago and was still excited about everything. They both had that casual confidence that comes from dealing with suburban nonsense on a daily basis. Noise complaints, loose dogs, middle-aged men reporting their cheating wives as trespassers. You know, the usual. Mrs. Kemp had followed me out of her house, because obviously she wasn't going to miss the show after setting the whole thing in motion. She stood on her porch in her bathrobe like she was watching a parade, probably already composing the phone call she'd make to her sister in Florida. I could practically hear her future conversation. "You'll never believe what happened on my street today, Gladys." The older cop, his name tag said Morrison, walked up to me first. He had that look on his face that said he'd already decided this call was going to be a waste of his time, but he was going to be professional about it anyway. "You the one who called this in, sir?" "That's me," I said, and my voice cracked a little. Real masculine. Real impressive. I cleared my throat. "My daughter's house. She's not home, but there are people inside who shouldn't be there." Officer Morrison pulled out a little notebook, the kind that cops always have in movies. "And you have a key to the residence?" "No, but does your daughter know these people are in her house?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? I hesitated just long enough for Morrison to notice. I think so. But that's not the point. The point is, who are the individuals inside, sir? The younger cop interrupted. His name tag said Chun, and he looked way too eager, like he thought this might turn into an actual exciting call instead of a domestic dispute. I took a deep breath. Here we go. My wife. And her friend. Male friend. Who is not me. They've been staying here while my daughter's out of town, and I didn't know about it. And, God, saying it out loud made it sound even more pathetic. I could see Morrison's expression shift from professional interest to, oh, this is one of those calls. So this is a domestic situation, Morrison said, not even making it a question. It's a trespassing situation, I corrected, knowing full well how desperate I sounded. They're using my daughter's house without permission. Mrs. Kemp chose that moment to pipe up from her porch. The wife's been here since Wednesday, with a man who drives a Lexus. I've seen everything. She said it with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting her entire life to be a witness in a police matter. Morrison sighed. The kind of sigh that said he'd been a cop for way too long and had seen way too much suburban nonsense. All right, we'll knock on the door, verify the situation. Sir, I'm going to ask you to wait here while we make contact. Wait here? Was he kidding? I'd driven 3 hours, called the cops on my own wife, and now I had to stand on the lawn like a rejected extra in my own life? But Chun was already gesturing for me to stay put. So I did, because arguing with police officers seemed like a great way to make this day even worse. I watched them walk up Riley's driveway, the same driveway I'd pulled into maybe 20 minutes ago when I still thought I was surprising my family with flowers and a trunk full of nostalgia. They stepped onto the porch with the pumpkins Riley had arranged in this Pinterest-perfect display. Morrison knocked. 3 solid raps that echoed across the quiet suburban evening. For a second, nothing happened. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Maybe they weren't home. Maybe they'd gone out to dinner. Maybe this whole thing was a misunderstanding and Mrs. Kemp had gotten confused and I'd just called the cops for absolutely nothing and I could still salvage. The door opened, and there she was, Marlene, my wife of 23 years. The woman I'd married when we were both 25 and stupid and thought we knew everything about love. The mother of my child. The person I'd shared a mortgage with, a bed with, a life with. She was wearing this fluffy white bathrobe I'd never seen before, definitely new, probably expensive, definitely not purchased with me in mind. Her blonde hair, which she usually kept neat and styled, was messy in that way that's supposed to look casual but actually takes effort. Or in that way that happens when you've been doing things you shouldn't be doing with someone who isn't your husband. Her face was flushed. From what? I didn't want to think about. And when she looked at the cops, she had this expression of mild confusion, like they'd interrupted her watching Netflix or something equally innocent. Yes, officers? Can I help you? Morrison gestured toward me, standing on Mrs. Kemp's lawn. Ma'am, do you know this gentleman? Marlene's eyes followed his gesture. And when she saw me, when she registered that I was standing there, that I'd found her, that I was the reason there were cops at the door, her face went through about 17 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, horror, panic, and then, finally, this pale, frozen expression like someone had dumped ice water directly into her soul. Sir, do you live here? Morrison asked her, which was weird because obviously Marlene wasn't a sir, but I guess cops have their scripts. Marlene's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like a fish that had just realized it was no longer in water. I'm visiting my daughter, she finally managed, and her voice was way too high. Defensive. Guilty. Funny. I called out from my position on the lawn, and I didn't even try to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Because your daughter's in Colorado, and last time I checked, she didn't list her mother's mystery boyfriend on the guest list. That's when he appeared. Gregory. Mr. Finance. Mr. Distinguished Gray Hair. Mr. I probably smell like expensive cologne. He materialized behind Marlene like a supporting actor stepping into frame, and I got my first real look at the guy my wife had been sneaking around with. Tall, just like Mrs. Kemp had said, wearing slacks and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my truck payment. Barefoot, which for some reason made everything worse. Those were his bare feet on my daughter's floor, walking around like he owned the place. Is there a problem here, officers? He asked, and his voice was smooth, confident. The kind of voice that's used to getting what it wants. He put his hand on Marlene's shoulder, possessive, comfortable, familiar. and I wanted to vault over Riley's garden gnomes and punch him directly in his distinguished face. Morrison looked from Gregory to Marlene to me and back again. I could see him putting the pieces together. I could see the exact moment he realized this call had nothing to do with trespassing and everything to do with a marriage falling apart in real time on a suburban doorstep. "Sir, what's your relationship to the homeowner?" he asked Gregory. "I'm a friend of the family," Gregory said smoothly. "Liar. We're house-sitting while Riley and Blake are traveling." "That's interesting," I shouted, taking a step forward. Chin immediately moved to block me, which was probably smart because I legitimately didn't know what I was about to do. Because I'm Riley's father, and nobody mentioned that my wife would be house-sitting with some random dude named Gregory. Marlene flinched when I said his name. "How did you? How did I know?" I laughed, and it came out bitter and sharp. "Book Club Gregory? Finance Gregory? Gregory who thinks the market's going to crash? That Gregory?" "Yeah. Marlene, you talked about him just enough that I should have figured this out months ago." Morrison held up his hand. "All right, everybody calm down. Ma'am, does your daughter know you're staying here?" And that's when Marlene said the thing that broke something fundamental in me. She looked Morrison right in the eye and said, "Yes. Riley knows. She gave us permission. Us. She said us. Like they were a couple. Like this was normal. Like my daughter had signed off on her mother's affair." I stood there on that perfect suburban lawn, watching my wife admit to a police officer that our daughter had helped her cheat, and something inside me just disconnected. You know that feeling when you're so angry and hurt and shocked that you actually go calm? That happened. My hands stopped shaking. My heart stopped racing. Everything just went quiet and cold. "You know what?" I said, and my voice was eerily steady. "I'm done. I'm going back to my truck. Officers, thank you for your time. I apologize for wasting it. Mrs. Kemp, thank you for your honesty. Marlene, Gregory, enjoy the rest of your romantic getaway in our daughter's house. I hope the guest bedroom has nice sheets." I turned around and started walking toward my truck. Behind me, I could hear Morrison saying something about domestic disputes and suggesting we all calm down. I could hear Marlene calling my name. "Wait. Please, let me explain," but I kept walking. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove away while two cops, one nosy neighbor, one cheating wife, and one smug finance guy watched me leave. I made it 3 blocks before I had to pull over because my hands were shaking too hard to drive safely. And that's when I finally called my daughter. I pulled into a Wendy's parking lot about 5 minutes away from Riley's neighborhood because apparently even emotional breakdowns require fast food ambience. The lot was mostly empty except for a minivan with a "My kid is an honor student" bumper sticker and a teenager's Honda Civic that was blasting music so loud I could feel the bass through my steering wheel. I parked in the far corner, away from everyone, and just sat there with the engine running and the heat on even though it wasn't cold. My hands were still gripping the steering, like it was the only solid thing left in my universe. For a solid 5 minutes, I just stared at the Wendy's logo on the building, that smiling red-headed girl who's been lying to us about square hamburgers being superior since 1969, and I started laughing. Not the good kind of laughing. The kind that's 2 seconds away from becoming something else entirely. The kind that makes people in parking lots avoid eye contact with you. I laughed because I'd driven 3 hours to surprise my family. I'd practiced my entrance line. I'd bought flowers from a grocery store. I'd called the goddamn police. And now I was sitting in a Wendy's parking lot having what could only be described as a premium mental breakdown. My phone was sitting in the cup holder, and I knew I needed to call Riley. I needed to hear her voice and have her tell me that Mrs. Kemp was wrong, that Marlene was wrong, that this was all some horrible misunderstanding involving lookalikes and coincidences and reality TV pranks. But I also knew, deep in that awful place where truth lives before your brain wants to acknowledge it, that if I called her, she was going to confirm everything. She was going to tell me she knew. She'd helped. And that was going to hurt worse than anything else that had happened today. I picked up the phone, put it down, picked it up again. A text message notification lit up the screen from Marlene. "Naturally. Please call me. Let me explain. It's not what you think." I deleted it without reading the rest. Another one came through immediately. "I'm sorry you found out this way." Delete. Another one. "Can we please talk like adults?" I almost threw my phone through the windshield. Instead, I called Riley. She answered on the second ring, all bright and cheerful like her world wasn't currently imploding. "Hey, Dad. What's up? Is everything okay? The sound of her voice, so normal, so casual, so completely unaware that I knew, made something twist in my chest. Oh, I'm fantastic, sweetheart, I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. Sharp enough to cut glass. Question for you. When exactly did you become your mom's accomplice in adultery? Was there an application process, or did she just ask you directly? Silence. Long, heavy silence. In the background, I could hear Blake saying something, probably asking who was on the phone. Riley's voice got quieter, more careful. Dad, where are you? I'm sitting in a Wendy's parking lot about 3 miles from your house, I said. You know, the house I just drove 3 hours to visit? The house where I thought I'd find you and Blake and Mom having a nice girls' weekend? Except surprise, you're not there. Blake's not there. But Mom is definitely there. With Gregory. Remember Gregory? Finance Gregory? Book Club Gregory? Distinguished gray hair Gregory, who's currently walking around your house barefoot like he pays the mortgage? Oh God. Riley's voice cracked. Dad, I can explain. Can you? I interrupted, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded. Deadly calm. The kind of calm that comes after you've cycled through every other emotion and landed on cold fury. Can you explain why you gave your mother permission to use your house as a cheap affair hotel? Can you explain why you didn't think maybe you should mention to your father that his wife was planning a romantic getaway with another man? I'm really curious about the logic here, Riley. Walk me through it. Dad, please don't be like this. Don't be like this? I laughed again, that unhinged sound that was becoming my new signature. I just called the cops on my own wife. I'm sitting in a Wendy's parking lot talking to my daughter who apparently thinks covering for her mother's infidelity is normal family behavior. How exactly should I be? Blake's voice came through the phone, muffled. Is that your dad? What's going on? Riley shushed him. I could hear them whispering back and forth, and it made me irrationally angry that she was consulting her husband of 8 months about how to handle her father's feelings. Her husband, who she'd probably told about this before telling me. Her husband, who was probably in on this whole thing too. Dad, Riley said finally, her voice doing that thing where it gets all measured and therapeutic, like she was talking to a hostile witness. Mom was unhappy. She's been unhappy for a long time. She needed space to figure things out. Space? The word came out louder than I intended. The teenager in the Honda Civic looked over at my truck. I didn't care. Space is going to a spa. Space is taking a yoga class. Space is not screwing around with Gregory from book club in your daughter's guest bedroom while your husband thinks you're having a girls' weekend. It's more complicated than that, Riley said, and she sounded like she was about to cry. Good. She should cry. We should all cry. We could form a support group. Idiots betrayed by people they trusted. We'd meet at Wendy's. Complicated, I repeated. Right. Here's what's not complicated. Your mother lied to me. You helped her lie to me. And now I'm the bad guy for being upset about it? That's not complicated, Riley. That's just shitty. She didn't want to hurt you. Riley tried, which might be the dumbest thing anyone had said to me all day, and that's including Gregory asking if there was a problem when the cops showed up. Well, she failed spectacularly at that, didn't she? I could feel my throat getting tight. And you're my daughter. You're supposed to be on my side. You're supposed to tell me when something like this is happening, not give her the spare key and wish her a nice time committing adultery. I'm not on anyone's side. Riley's voice rose. This isn't about sides. Mom needed support, and I needed support? I was yelling now. Full volume. The Honda Civic kid was definitely watching. I'm her husband. If she needed support, maybe she should have talked to me. If she was unhappy, maybe we could have gone to counseling. Instead, she went to Gregory, and you gave them a place to do it. Do you understand how messed up that is? Riley was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. Part of me, the dad part, the part that had held her when she was 5 and fell off her bike, wanted to apologize. Wanted to say it was okay, we'd figure it out. I wasn't actually mad at her. But the rest of me, the part that had just watched his entire life explode on a suburban doorstep, was too angry to care. Dad, please, she sobbed. I didn't know what to do. She begged me not to tell you. She said she needed time to think. I thought maybe they'd figure out it was a mistake, and it would end, and you'd never have to know. I was trying to protect you. Protect me. I laughed, bitter and sharp. You were protecting her, Riley. Not me. Her. And you know what the worst part is? I came here to surprise you. I took the day off work. I loaded up that stupid trunk you've been asking for. I drove 3 hours listening to Journey and thinking about what a great dad I was being. I had flowers, Riley. Gas station flowers. And instead of getting to see my daughter, I got to watch my wife open the door in a bathrobe she bought to impress another man. Silence on the other end. Just crying. Blake was saying something soothing in the background. I wondered if this was the first time Riley had really understood what she'd done. I wondered if she'd convinced herself this was somehow noble, helping her mother find herself, or whatever therapy speak she'd used to justify it. I need to go, I said finally, suddenly exhausted. I need to drive home, and I need to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life now that I know my wife's been lying to me and my daughter's been helping her do it. Dad, wait. I hung up, turned off my phone completely, sat there in the Wendy's parking lot while the sun finished setting and the sky turned that ugly gray-purple color that happens right before it gets completely dark. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger, older, tired, defeated. I looked like a man who'd just lost a fight he didn't even know he was in. Eventually, I started the truck and got back on the highway heading home. 3 hours in reverse. 3 hours to replay every conversation I'd had with Marlene in the last 6 months, looking for signs I'd missed. 3 hours to wonder how long this had been going on. 3 hours to realize that Gregory probably wasn't the first. That book club probably wasn't just book club. That all those gym visits and girls' nights and late work meetings were probably exactly what I'd been too stupid to suspect. Around hour 2, I started laughing again. Not the breakdown kind this time. The bitter, accepting kind. Because I'd spent the entire drive down here singing Don't Stop Believin' at the top of my lungs, feeling like the world's best surprise dad. And now I was driving home in complete silence, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. I stopped at a gas station about an hour from home. Got more coffee I didn't need. The cashier asked if I was okay. I said, sure, just found out my wife's cheating on me, my daughter's helping her do it, and I called the cops like a psycho instead of handling it like an adult. Living the dream. She gave me the coffee for free and said her ex-husband had done the same thing, except with his secretary, which is apparently very unoriginal. We had a moment of betrayed spouse solidarity over unleaded gas and lottery tickets. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my empty, quiet driveway where Marlene's car should have been but wasn't, it was almost midnight. I sat in the truck for another 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The house felt different. Foreign. Like I was trespassing in someone else's life. I went straight to the bedroom, looked at our bed, that bed I'd shared with Marlene for over 2 decades, and decided I'd be sleeping on the couch from now on. Forever, maybe. I'd burn that mattress before I slept on it again. I grabbed a pillow and a blanket, went to the living room, turned on the TV to some late-night talk show I didn't care about, and lay there staring at the ceiling. My phone was still off. Somewhere, Marlene was probably panicking. Riley was probably guilt-spiraling. Gregory was probably Googling how to calm down someone else's angry husband. And me? I was thinking about how I'd rehearsed my entrance line in the truck mirror. Guess who missed you? Yeah, guess who was a complete idiot? I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. I lay on my couch, the same couch Marlene and I had picked out together at some furniture store where the salesman had been way too enthusiastic about sectionals, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, I'd gotten up and made coffee. Even though my hands were shaking so badly, I spilled grounds all over the counter. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I'd consumed approximately 17 cups of coffee, watched infomercials for kitchen gadgets I'd never buy, and made a decision. I wasn't going to be the sad, pathetic husband who begged his wife to come back. I was going to be strategic, calculated. I was going to hit them where it hurt. My phone had stayed off all weekend. I'd ignored the temptation to turn it on approximately 400 times. I knew what would be waiting for me. Voicemails from Marlene, texts from Riley, maybe even a message from Gregory if the guy had the audacity. But I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. First, I needed to talk to someone who could actually help me instead of just offering sympathy and casseroles like this was a funeral. So Monday morning, still wearing the same clothes from Friday because showering had seemed pointless, I called my brother Tim. Tim's a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer. He does corporate law or contract law or some boring thing involving paperwork and billable hours, but he knows people. He's connected. And more importantly, he's my brother, which meant he was contractually obligated to be on my side, even if I'd done something stupid. Which I had. Multiple times. in front of police officers. Tim answered on the first ring. Jesus Christ, I've been trying to reach you all weekend. Marlene's been calling me. Riley's been calling me. What the hell happened? I gave him the abbreviated version. The surprise visit. Mrs. Kemp. Gregory. The cops. The phone call with Riley. By the time I finished, Tim was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You called the police on your own wife?" In my defense, I was having what medical professionals would probably classify as a mental breakdown. Fair enough, Tim said, and I could hear him typing on his computer, probably already pulling up contacts. Okay, so here's what you need to do. You need advice or vengeance? Both, I said immediately. I want both. I want her to hurt the way I'm hurting, and I want to make sure she doesn't take everything I own while she's doing it. That's the spirit, Tim said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. My brother had never particularly liked Marlene. He'd never said it directly, but there had always been this tension between them, this unspoken judgment. Now he finally got to be right about her. I'm going to set you up with Rebecca Holt. She's a colleague of mine. Well, not exactly a colleague. She works at a different firm, but we've collaborated on cases. She specializes in divorce law, and she's absolutely ruthless. I've seen her eviscerate people in depositions. You'll like her. Does she charge a fortune? Probably. But you're about to take Marlene for everything she's worth, so consider it an investment. Tim set up a meeting for that afternoon. I finally showered, put on actual clean clothes that didn't smell like betrayal in Wendy's parking lot, and drove to Rebecca Holt's office in the city. The building was one of those modern glass structures that screamed, "We bill by the minute, and we're not sorry about it." The lobby had abstract art on the walls that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto a canvas and called it genius. Rebecca's office was on the 14th floor. Her receptionist, a young guy with designer glasses and an attitude that suggested he'd seen enough divorce drama to write a best-selling novel, showed me into a conference room and told me Miss Holt would be right with me. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 20 people, and that new furniture smell that rich people apparently prefer to regular air. Rebecca walked in 5 minutes later, and she was exactly what I'd hoped for. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed in one of those power suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, dark hair pulled back in a style that said, "I don't have time for nonsense," and an expression that suggested she could smell weakness and exploited it for a living. She shook my hand with a grip that could crush walnuts. "Tim tells me you've had an interesting weekend," she said, sitting down across from me and pulling out a legal pad. "Walk me through everything. Don't leave anything out, even if you think it makes you look bad. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." So I told her. Everything. The surprise visit, Mrs. Kemp's warning, calling 911 like an idiot, watching Marlene open the door in her affair bathrobe, Gregory's barefoot confidence, Riley's confession that she'd helped orchestrate the whole thing. Rebecca took notes in this efficient shorthand that probably spelled, "Your wife is screwed," in lawyer language. When I finished, she looked up from her legal pad and smiled. Not a warm smile. A shark smile. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit her with financial precision. No screaming, no public drama, no showing up at her boyfriend's house with a baseball bat." I wasn't going to. Yes, you were thinking about it. Everyone thinks about it. Don't. It's satisfying for 30 seconds and expensive for 30 years. She flipped to a new page on her legal pad. "What we're going to do is go through every single financial record you have access to. Credit cards, bank accounts, joint savings, everything. We're going to document every penny she spent on this affair, and then we're going to make her pay for it." Literally. Over the next 2 hours, Rebecca walked me through the strategy. We'd file for divorce immediately, citing adultery, which in our state actually mattered for asset division. We'd subpoena her credit card records and bank statements. We'd document the timeline of the affair based on receipts and transactions. We'd prove that she'd been using marital funds, my money I'd earned working 60-hour weeks at a job I hated, to finance her romance with Gregory, the distinguished finance guy. "Here's what usually happens in these cases," Rebecca explained, clicking through something on her laptop and turning it around to show me spreadsheets that made my head hurt. "The cheating spouse thinks they're being careful. They think they're covering their tracks, but they always slip up. Hotel stays on the joint credit card. Jewelry purchases they claim are for themselves, but are actually gifts for the affair partner. Restaurant bills that are way too expensive for lunch with the girls. We find it all, and then we use it to absolutely destroy them in court. I pulled out my phone, finally turned it back on, and immediately regretted it when I saw 63 missed calls and about 100 text messages, and logged into our joint bank account. Rebecca watched over my shoulder as we scrolled through the last 6 months of transactions. And holy hell, she was right. There it was. All of it. Hotel stays in the city on weekends when Marlene claimed she was at book club retreats. Charges to expensive restaurants I'd never been to. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany's for $2,000 that I definitely never received the benefits of. What's this one? Rebecca asked, pointing at a charge from 3 months ago. The Ritz-Carlton, Friday through Sunday. $500 a night. She told me she was at a scrapbooking convention, I said, and even saying it out loud made me realize how stupid I'd been. A scrapbooking convention at the Ritz-Carlton. And I believed her. Rebecca made a note. We're going to call it marital asset misuse in the filing. The judge is going to love this. We went through everything. Every suspicious charge, every weekend getaway, every piece of jewelry that had mysteriously appeared in Gregory's life instead of mine. By the end of it, we documented approximately $35,000 in affair-related expenses over the last 8 months. $35,000 of my money, spent on hotels and dinners and gifts for a man who probably didn't even know my wife was married when they first started whatever the hell this was. This is actually kind of impressive, Rebecca said, and she sounded genuinely amazed. I've seen people spend money on affairs before, but your wife went all in. She wasn't even trying to hide it toward the end. Should I feel special that she didn't respect me enough to cover her tracks? No, you should feel relieved, because it makes my job incredibly easy. She closed her laptop and looked at me with that shark smile again. Here's what's going to happen. We file this week. We ask for everything. The house, the majority of savings, compensation for the marital funds she misused. Her lawyer is going to argue that she deserves half because that's community property. We're going to argue that she forfeited her right to community property when she decided to treat the marriage like an ATM for her affair. The judge might not give us everything, but we're going to walk away with enough to make her regret ever meeting Gregory. What about Riley? I asked, because that was the part that hurt worse than anything Marlene had done. She helped. She gave them the house. She lied to me. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. That's not a legal matter. That's a family matter. But for what it's worth, your daughter is an adult who made an adult decision to betray your trust. You don't owe her forgiveness just because she's your kid. That's something you get to decide on your own timeline. I left Rebecca's office feeling something I hadn't felt since Friday. Powerful. In control. Like maybe I wasn't just the sad, pathetic husband who got cheated on. Maybe I was the guy who was going to win. My phone rang as I was getting into my truck. Marlene. I let it go to voicemail. She'd been calling all weekend, probably panicking, probably trying to spin some narrative where this was somehow my fault for not appreciating her, or giving her attention, or whatever excuse cheaters use to justify their choices. I didn't care. Rebecca had given me homework, gathering documents, listing assets, preparing for war. Riley tried calling next. I ignored her too. She'd sent approximately 47 text messages over the weekend, ranging from "Dad, please call me," to "I'm so sorry," to "You can't ignore me forever. Watch me, sweetheart. Watch me ignore you for exactly as long as it takes for you to understand what you did." Tim called that evening. So, how'd it go with Rebecca? I think I'm in love with her, I said. In a purely professional, she's going to destroy my wife kind of way. Tim laughed. She's good, right? I told you. So what's the plan? The plan is to take Marlene for everything she's worth, and then some. The plan is to make sure Gregory realizes he didn't just get a girlfriend. He got a broke girlfriend with a vindictive ex-husband. The plan is revenge, Tim. Cold, calculated, financially devastating revenge. That's my brother, Tim said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. You need anything? I'm here. That night, I actually slept. Not great sleep. I dreamed about courtrooms and spreadsheets and Marlene crying in front of a judge, but sleep nonetheless. And when I woke up Tuesday morning, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt focused, determined, ready. Marlene thought she could have her affair and her comfortable life too. She thought she could use our daughter as cover and our money as funding, and I'd never figure it out or never do anything about it. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. The first mediation session happened 3 weeks after I filed for divorce. And let me tell you, nothing prepares you for the surreal experience of sitting across a conference table from your wife of 23 years while lawyers shuffle papers, and a mediator who looks like she'd rather be literally anywhere else tries to convince everyone to approach this rationally. Rational went out the window the moment I found Marlene playing house with Gregory, but sure, let's pretend we're all reasonable adults here. The mediation took place in a neutral office building downtown, one of those deliberately bland spaces designed to prevent people from getting too emotional, with beige walls, generic landscape paintings, and furniture that looked like it came from the soulless professional section of an IKEA catalog. There was a bowl of individually wrapped mints on the table, because apparently nothing says your marriage is over like complimentary breath fresheners. Marlene arrived first with her lawyer, a guy named Dennis Pritchard, who looked exactly like what you'd get if you ordered sleazy divorce attorney from a catalog. Expensive suit that was trying too hard, slicked back hair that screamed, "I use more product than my ex-wife," and a smile that suggested he'd perfected the art of lying with his teeth showing. He probably drove a Porsche and told people at parties that he was helping people navigate difficult life transitions, instead of admitting he made his living off human misery. When I walked in with Rebecca, I had the satisfaction of watching Marlene's face go pale. She looked terrible, and I don't say that with any joy. Okay, maybe a little joy, like she hadn't been sleeping. Her hair was different, shorter, probably one of those post-affair makeovers that women do when they're trying to reinvent themselves. She was wearing a conservative dress that was clearly chosen to make her look sympathetic, like a woman who'd made a mistake rather than a woman who'd spent $35,000 of her husband's money on hotel rooms and jewelry for her boyfriend. "Gentlemen, lady," the mediator said. Her name was Patricia something, and she had that exhausted energy of someone who'd seen way too many divorces and had lost faith in human relationships entirely. "Let's begin. We're here today to discuss the division of assets in the dissolution of the marriage between—" "Can I just say something first?" Marlene interrupted, and her voice was shaky. "Oh, here we go. The performance. Dennis probably coached her on this. Look vulnerable. Look hurt. Make yourself the victim." Patricia sighed. "Mrs. I just want him to know that I never meant to hurt him," Marlene continued, and her eyes were already welling up with tears. Premium quality tears, the kind that come with months of practice. This wasn't about him. This was about me finding myself, about feeling alive again, about spending my money on hotel rooms. I interrupted, because I wasn't about to sit through this script. Rebecca put a hand on my arm. The universal lawyer gesture for, "Shut up and let me do my job," but I was on a roll. About lying for 8 months? About using our daughter as an accomplice? Which part of that was about finding yourself? Exactly. Dennis jumped in, all smooth and professional. "My client acknowledges that mistakes were made." "Mistakes?" I laughed, and it came out harsh. "Mistakes are forgetting to pick up milk at the store. Mistakes are accidentally recording over someone's favorite show. Having an affair and funding it with marital assets isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Multiple choices. Hundreds of choices over 8 months. Rebecca squeezed my arm harder. Message received. I leaned back in my chair and let her take over, which was what I was paying her an obscene amount of money to do. My client is seeking full ownership of the marital home, 65% of joint savings accounts, and compensation for the documented misuse of marital funds during Mrs. Marlene's extramarital affair, Rebecca said, sliding a folder across the table to Dennis. You'll find detailed financial records in there. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, all using joint accounts, all during the course of the affair. Dennis opened the folder, and I watched his face as he flipped through the pages. To his credit, he kept his expression neutral, but I could see the moment he realized how screwed his client was. This wasn't a he said she said situation. This was a paper trail situation. This was a your client spent enough on her boyfriend to buy a decent used car situation. Marlene was crying now. Full waterworks. The mediator pushed the box of tissues across the table. She probably kept them in bulk for occasions exactly like this. I didn't think. I wasn't trying to. The money wasn't supposed to be. Marlene couldn't even finish a sentence through her sobbing. Mrs. Marlene, Patricia said gently, did you or did you not use marital funds to finance your relationship with? She checked her notes. Gregory Hammond? It wasn't like that, Marlene managed between sobs. We weren't thinking about money. We connected. He understood me in ways that. She looked at me, mascara running down her face. In ways you stopped understanding me years ago. And there it was. The pivot. The part where somehow this became my fault. Where her affair was actually a symptom of my failings as a husband. I could see Dennis nodding encouragingly, probably thrilled that his client was finally giving him something to work with. So let me get this straight, I said, ignoring Rebecca's warning squeeze. I failed to understand you. So you responded by committing adultery and spending $35,000 of our money on it? That's the argument we're going with. Dennis cleared his throat. My client was in an emotionally vulnerable state. The marriage had been deteriorating for years. The marriage was fine. I shot back. We went on vacation last summer. We celebrated our anniversary. We had dinner together 3 times a week. Just because it wasn't some romance novel fantasy doesn't mean it was deteriorating. You were emotionally distant, Marlene said, and her voice was getting stronger now, less crying and more defensive. You worked all the time. You stopped asking about my day. You forgot our anniversary 2 years ago. I was in the hospital with kidney stones. I practically shouted. I was literally passing a kidney stone on our anniversary, and you're using that as justification for screwing Gregory? Patricia held up her hands. Let's everyone take a breath. This kind of blame exchange isn't productive. You want to know what's not productive? I asked, looking directly at Marlene. Pretending this is about me being distant. You know what distant people do? They go to marriage counseling. They have conversations. They don't immediately jump to having an affair and using their daughter's house as a cheap motel. Marlene flinched at that. Good. She should flinch. The mediation went on for another 2 hours. Dennis argued that Marlene deserved half of everything, because that's how community property works. Rebecca countered with the affair, the financial betrayal, the fact that Marlene had essentially stolen from the marriage to fund her relationship. Patricia tried to find middle ground, suggesting various division scenarios that neither side was happy with. When Dennis demanded Marlene get half the house, I lost it again. You didn't even like that house. I said to Marlene. You complained about it constantly. You said the kitchen was too small. You said the porch looked like a crime scene. And now suddenly you want half of it. It's my home too, Marlene said weakly. It was your home until you decided to make Gregory's bed your home. I shot back. Rebecca actually smiled at that one. Dennis objected. Patricia called for another break, and we all sat there eating mints nobody wanted and avoiding eye contact. During the break, Rebecca pulled me aside. You're doing great, she whispered. I mean, you're supposed to stay quiet and let me handle it, but your outbursts are actually helping. The mediator can see how genuinely hurt you are. Keep it up, but maybe dial it back like 10%. I'm not performing, I said. I'm just angry. I know. That's what makes it effective. When we reconvened, Dennis made his big play. He pulled out this whole presentation about how Marlene had sacrificed her career to support my work, how she'd devoted herself to raising Riley, how she deserved compensation for years of unpaid domestic labor. It was impressive, actually. He made her sound like a saint who'd spent 2 decades in servitude rather than a woman who'd had a part-time job she liked and plenty of time for book clubs and apparently extended affairs. My client gave the best years of her life to this marriage, Dennis said, and he sounded genuinely passionate about it. Maybe he actually believed it. Maybe that's what made him good at his job, the ability to convince himself his client's version of reality was the truth. Rebecca let him finish his whole speech. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up a spreadsheet, and turned it around so everyone could see. Mrs. Marlene's devotion to the marriage, Rebecca said dryly. Documented by month. Blue bars represent marital funds spent on affair-related activities. Red bars represent time spent with Mr. Hammond versus time spent with her husband. You'll notice they correlate nicely. It was brutal. It was beautiful. Dennis's face went red. Marlene started crying again. Patricia looked like she wanted to retire early. My client invested everything in this marriage, Rebecca continued. His time, his money, his trust. Mrs. Marlene invested in a relationship with another man using her husband's resources. If we're talking about who sacrificed what, the numbers speak for themselves. By the time we left that mediation, we hadn't reached an agreement. Dennis was demanding more time to review the evidence. Patricia was scheduling another session. Marlene was crying in the parking lot, probably calling Gregory to tell him how mean I was being. And me? I walked to my truck with Rebecca, who was looking extremely satisfied with herself. How'd I do? I asked. You called your wife's affair partner's bed her home, Rebecca said. That's going to haunt her for years. Well done. In the end, it took 2 more mediations and 1 actual court appearance before the divorce was finalized. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd probably presided over 10,000 divorces and had lost all patience for affair-related drama, listened to Dennis's arguments about Marlene's sacrifices and contributions. Then she looked at Rebecca's financial documents. Then she looked at Marlene. Mrs. Marlene, did you or did you not spend approximately $35,000 of marital funds on an extramarital relationship? Yes, but that's all I need to hear. She banged her gavel. I got the house. I got 60% of the savings. I got the satisfaction of watching Marlene realize that Gregory wasn't rich. He was just a man with good hair, bad judgment, and a girlfriend who was now broke. The look on her face was better than any alimony check could have been. The first night alone in the house after the divorce was finalized felt like living in a museum dedicated to a life I didn't recognize anymore. Everything was exactly where it had always been. The couch Marlene and I had argued about buying because she wanted leather and I wanted fabric. The coffee table with the ring stain from that one time I forgot to use a coaster and she didn't talk to me for 2 days. The wedding photos on the mantle that I kept meaning to take down but couldn't quite bring myself to touch. It was like walking through a crime scene where the victim was my entire marriage, and I was both the detective and the corpse. I did pathetic bachelor things. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. Not even good cereal, just whatever was left in the pantry, which turned out to be some high-fiber cardboard situation that Marlene had bought during one of her health kicks. I watched sitcoms I didn't care about, the kind where families solve all their problems in 22 minutes, and everyone learns a valuable lesson. I talked to the TV more than I'd like to admit. Jeopardy became my therapist. What is emotional devastation, Alex? I'd say to the screen, even though Alex Trebek was dead and I was losing my mind. I gained 15 pounds in the first month, lost 20 in the second, grew a beard because shaving seemed like too much effort, then shaved it off because I looked like a depressed lumberjack who'd given up on life. I bought a plant, one of those supposedly indestructible succulents, and managed to kill it within 3 weeks. I didn't even know you could overwater a succulent, but apparently when you pour your emotional baggage into plant care, things get complicated. The house felt too big and too small at the same time. Too big because every room echoed with the absence of the life I'd thought I was living. Too small because everywhere I looked, I saw reminders. The kitchen where Marlene used to make coffee every morning, always using too much creamer and then complaining that her jeans didn't fit. The bedroom where I still couldn't bring myself to sleep, where I'd moved to the guest room instead because our old bed felt haunted. The garage where her car used to park next to mine, and now there was just empty space that mocked me every time I pulled in. My brother Tim called every few days to check on me, which was nice in theory, but mostly just reminded me that everyone knew I was the guy whose wife cheated on him. You doing okay? He'd ask, and I'd lie and say, yeah, fine. And he'd pretend to believe me because that's what brothers do. He invited me to dinner with his family twice. I went once, sat at their table watching his wife and kids do normal family things, and excused myself early because it felt like watching a nature documentary about a species I used to belong to but was now extinct. Work became my escape. I threw myself into it with the kind of dedication that makes co-workers uncomfortable. 60-hour weeks turned into 70. I volunteered for projects nobody wanted. I stayed late not because I loved my job. I didn't. I sold insurance, which is about as exciting as it sounds, but because going home meant confronting the reality that I was 50 years old, recently divorced, and had no idea how to be a single person. Then, for months after the divorce was finalized, I got an email from Riley. The first direct contact she'd attempted since I'd hung up on her in that Wendy's parking lot. I saw her name in my inbox, and my first instinct was to delete it. My second instinct was also to delete it. But curiosity, or maybe masochism, hard to tell the difference at that point, made me open it instead. The subject line was just Dad. No preview text, no hint of what was inside. I stared at it for a solid 5 minutes before clicking. Dad, I'm sorry. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way. I've been in therapy. Blake suggested it after everything happened, and my therapist says I should write you a letter even if you never respond. So here it is. I was wrong. I should have told you about Mom. I should have refused to help her. I convinced myself I was being loyal to her, that I was helping her through a difficult time, that maybe if she got this out of her system she'd come back to you, and you'd never have to know. I told myself a lot of things that made me feel better about lying to you. But the truth is I was a coward. I chose her over you because it was easier, because she asked first, because I didn't want to deal with the fallout. And I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that I miss you. I miss my dad. And I'm sorry I wasn't the daughter you deserved. Love, Riley. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed without responding because I didn't know what to say. Sorry doesn't fix betrayal. Therapy doesn't erase the fact that your daughter helped your wife cheat on you. I miss my dad doesn't bring back the relationship we had before, the one where I trusted her completely and would have done anything for her. But the email sat in my inbox like a weight, and over the next few days I kept going back to it, reading it again, looking for hints of manipulation or genuine remorse, wondering if I was supposed to be the bigger person here, the forgiving father who rises above, wondering if I even wanted to be that person or if I'd rather hold on to my anger, because at least anger felt like something other than emptiness. 2 weeks later, I responded. Just one line. I appreciate you taking responsibility. I'm not ready to have a conversation yet, but I got your email. It felt formal and cold, like I was responding to a business inquiry rather than my daughter's apology, but it was the best I could do. Baby steps towards something that might eventually resemble a relationship again. Or maybe not. I genuinely didn't know. My therapist? Yeah, I got a therapist, Dr. Melissa White, because apparently when your entire life implodes you can't just power through it with Serial and Jeopardy. Thought the email was a breakthrough. You're processing your feelings, she said during our session, nodding encouragingly like I'd just learned to use the potty. You're allowing yourself to sit with the complexity of forgiveness versus self-protection. I'm not forgiving her, I clarified. I didn't say you were. I said you're processing. Dr. White had this infuriating habit of making everything sound therapeutic even when it was just me being angry. Tell me, how does it feel to have acknowledged her apology? Like I opened a door I'm not sure I want to walk through. That's very insightful. You say that about everything. Because you're being insightful about everything. You just don't give yourself credit. Therapy was weird. I'd resisted it at first because I'm from the generation that thinks therapy is for people who can't handle their problems, not for insurance salesmen going through messy divorces. But Tim had insisted, Rebecca had recommended it, and eventually I'd run out of excuses. Dr. White's office smelled like lavender and had too many plants, all of them alive, which felt like a personal attack given my succulent situation. She had one of those faces that made you want to tell her things, which I guess is the job requirement for therapists. Let's talk about bitterness, she said during one session, after I'd spent 20 minutes ranting about how Marlene was apparently doing great, according to Tim, who'd heard from someone who'd seen her at the grocery store looking happy and well-adjusted. What about it? I asked. I'm bitter. Seems appropriate given the circumstances. Bitterness is understandable, Dr. White agreed. But it's also corrosive. It hurts you more than it hurts anyone else. You're essentially drinking poison and hoping Marlene gets sick. That's a terrible metaphor. It's a very common metaphor that exists for a reason. Fine. So what am I supposed to do? Just stop being bitter? Decide to be happy? Think positive thoughts and manifest joy? No, she said patiently. You're supposed to acknowledge the bitterness, understand where it comes from, and then decide whether you want to keep carrying it around or if maybe it's too heavy to keep holding. I hated when she was right, which was always. Slowly, painfully slowly, like watching grass grow or paint dry or any other metaphor for things that take forever, life started to taste better again. Not good, exactly. Not like it had been before, but less awful. I started sleeping in the master bedroom again after I bought a new mattress and new sheets, and basically changed everything until it didn't feel like Marlene's ghost was haunting the pillows. I joined a gym, not because I cared about fitness, but because Dr. White suggested I needed routine and structure. I met a guy there named Carl who was also divorced and also had no idea what he was doing with his life, and we became workout buddies in the way that middle-aged divorced men become buddies. mostly grunting at waits and occasionally admitting things were hard. I even started dating. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and dinner dates and the occasional movie with women I met through apps that made me feel ancient and confused. Swipe right. Swipe left. Super like. I felt like I needed a tutorial. Most of the dates were fine. Some were disasters. One woman spent the entire dinner talking about her ex-husband's inadequacies in excruciating detail, and I thought, is this what I sound like? Another woman brought her emotional support ferret to the restaurant. A ferret, named Mr. Whiskers. I didn't see her again, but then I met Claire. Claire was different. She laughed at my jokes. The bad ones, not just the polite laugh you give someone out of obligation. She didn't cheat at Scrabble, which sounds stupid but felt significant given my trust issues. She had her own baggage, divorced, 2 grown kids, a cat named Attila who lived up to the name, but she wore it well. She didn't try to fix me or save me or convince me that everything happens for a reason. She just existed next to me in a way that felt comfortable instead of complicated. So your wife cheated on you with a guy named Gregory and your daughter helped cover it up? She asked on our 3rd date, after I'd finally told her the whole story. That's the extremely depressing summary, yes. And you called the cops? Not my finest moment. She grinned. I think that's hilarious. My ex-husband cheated on me with his dental hygienist. Very original. And I just cried. And ate ice cream for 3 months. I wish I'd called the cops. I liked her immediately. 6 months after the divorce, I was in a place I never thought I'd reach. Okay. Not great. Not healed. But okay. Functional. Going through days without constantly thinking about Marlene and Gregory and betrayal. The house felt less like a crime scene and more like just a house. Work was still boring but manageable. I had friends. Well, Tim and Carl, and sort of Claire, which felt like enough. The empty space where my marriage used to be was still there, but I'd stopped falling into it every 5 minutes. And then my phone rang. It was Riley, and she was crying. Dad, she sobbed. I need your help. It's Sophie. She's sick. Sophie, my granddaughter, Riley's daughter, 3 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs and sparkly shoes, possibly the only person in the world who still thought I hung the moon. I'd only seen her a handful of times since the divorce. Awkward visits arranged through Blake, where Riley and I circled each other like diplomats from hostile nations trying to negotiate peace treaties. But Sophie didn't care about adult drama. She just knew I was Grandpa, the guy who made funny faces and snuck her cookies when her parents weren't looking. What do you mean she's sick? I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I was sitting in my living room, halfway through a microwave dinner that suddenly seemed completely unimportant. What's wrong with her? Riley could barely get the words out through her crying. Leukemia. They diagnosed her 3 days ago. She's been tired, getting bruises, and we thought it was just normal kid stuff. But then the pediatrician ran blood tests, and she broke down completely, making these awful sobbing sounds that no parent should ever have to make. My heart dropped into my stomach. 3 years old. Leukemia. Those 2 things shouldn't exist in the same sentence. What are the doctors saying? What's the treatment? Blake's voice came on the line. He must have taken the phone from Riley. Hey, Dad. He'd started calling me Dad after the wedding, which had felt weird at first, but I'd gotten used to it. They're saying she needs a bone marrow transplant. They're testing family members to see if anyone's a match. Riley's not. I'm not. We're trying to reach Marlene, but he paused. We were hoping you might be willing to get tested. Willing. Like there was a universe where I'd say no. Like I'd let my anger at Riley override my granddaughter's chance at living. Of course I'll get tested, I said immediately. When? Where? What do I need to do? Blake gave me the details, the hospital, the oncology department, the doctor's name. I wrote it all down on the back of a junk mail envelope with a pen that barely worked, my hands shaking just enough to make my handwriting look drunk. Riley was still crying in the background. I could hear Blake trying to comfort her, his voice low and soothing in that way that people use when they're also terrified but trying not to show it. Can I talk to Riley? I asked. There was a pause, some shuffling, and then Riley's voice came back on. Dad, I'm getting tested tomorrow, I said. First thing. And Riley? I know things have been complicated between us, but this isn't about that. This is about Sophie. So whatever you need, whatever she needs, I'm here. Okay. She sobbed harder. Thank you. God, thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about everything. I'm sorry about Mom. I'm sorry about lying to you. I'm sorry about. We'll deal with all that later, I interrupted, because I couldn't handle a full emotional reconciliation while processing that my granddaughter had cancer. Right now we focus on Sophie. That's all that matters. I hung up and just sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd just heard. Leukemia. Bone marrow transplant. 3 years old. My brain kept short-circuiting on those facts, unable to make them fit into any version of reality that made sense. Kids aren't supposed to get cancer. That's not how life is supposed to work. But apparently life doesn't care about supposed to, because here we were. I called Claire. She answered on the second ring, sounding concerned because I never called this late. Is everything okay? My granddaughter has leukemia, I said, and hearing myself say it out loud made it real in a way that Riley's sobbing hadn't. She's 3. She needs a bone marrow transplant. They're testing family members. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over? No. Yes. I don't know. I just needed to tell someone who isn't falling apart. She came over anyway. Brought wine and the kind of quiet presence that doesn't try to fix anything, just exists alongside the awful. We sat on the couch, the same couch where I'd spent so many nights after Marlene left, the couch that had witnessed every stage of my breakdown and recovery. And she held my hand while I stared at nothing and tried to figure out how to be angry at Riley and terrified for Sophie at the same time. You know what the worst part is? I said finally. I wanted to stay mad at Riley. I wanted to hold on to that anger and make her earn her way back into my life. And now I can't, because her daughter is dying and I have to show up and be the bigger person and pretend like everything's fine when nothing's fine. Her daughter isn't dying, Claire said firmly. Not yet. Not if you're a match. Not if the treatment works. You don't get to catastrophize before you know what you're dealing with. Are you seriously therapizing me right now? Someone has to. You're spiraling. She was right. I was spiraling. But also, my granddaughter had cancer, so spiraling seemed like a pretty reasonable response. The next morning, I went to the hospital at 7 a.m. for testing. The oncology department was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine. Pale walls, uncomfortable chairs, that distinct hospital smell of antiseptic and despair. There were other people waiting, other families dealing with their own nightmares, and I felt like an intruder in their grief. A nurse called my name, led me to a room, and explained what they'd be doing: blood draw, cheek swab, some other tests I didn't fully understand because my brain was still processing the fact that I was here at all. How long until we know if I'm a match? I asked. Usually about a week, the nurse said. She had kind eyes and probably delivered bad news to terrified families every single day. But given the urgency of your granddaughter's case, we'll rush it. Should know in a few days. 3 days. I had to wait 3 days to find out if I could save Sophie's life. 3 days of existing in this horrible limbo between hope and helplessness. I texted Riley after. Got tested. They're rushing the results. She responded immediately with a string of thank yous and heart emojis and prayers and gratitude that felt simultaneously genuine and desperate. I didn't know how to respond, so I just sent back a thumbs up, which felt wildly inadequate but was all I had. Dr. White had an emergency opening that afternoon. I called her office in a panic, and apparently my granddaughter has cancer, gets you bumped up the schedule. I sat in her office with the too many plants and told her everything. Sophie, the testing, Riley, the impossible situation of having to reconcile with someone who'd betrayed me because biology demanded it. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about this, Dr. White said. You can be angry at Riley and still love Sophie. You can be the bigger person and still need time to heal. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. But what if I'm a match? What if I donate bone marrow and save Sophie's life, and then Riley thinks that means everything's forgiven and we go back to pretending like she didn't help Mom cheat on me? Then you have a conversation about boundaries. You tell her that saving Sophie's life doesn't erase what happened between you two, that you can be her father and Sophie's grandfather without pretending the betrayal never occurred. And if I'm not a match? Dr. White's expression softened. Then they'll find another donor. There are registries, databases. You're not Sophie's only hope, even though it feels that way right now. But I wanted to be. I wanted to be the one who saved her, not because it would make Riley forgive me or make me feel like a hero, but because Sophie was 3 years old and loved dinosaurs and thought I was funny. And if my bone marrow could fix this, then it goddamn better be a match. The next 3 days were torture. I went to work, but couldn't focus. I went to the gym with Carl, but gave up after 10 minutes. I saw Claire and tried to pretend I was okay, but she saw through it immediately because that's what people who actually care about you do. They see through your bullshit and call you on it. You're catastrophizing again, she said over dinner at her place. Attila the cat was judging me from across the room. I'm realistically considering outcomes. You're spiraling. There's a difference. On the third day, the hospital called. I was at work, in the middle of explaining insurance options to a client who definitely wasn't listening, when my phone rang. I saw the hospital's name on the caller ID and my heart stopped. "Excuse me," I said to the client, and walked out of my office without any explanation. Found an empty conference room. Answered the phone with shaking hands. "Mr. Thompson? This is Dr. Ramirez from oncology. We have your test results." I couldn't breathe. "And you're a match. A very good match, actually. We'd like to move forward with the donation as soon as possible if you're willing." I sat down hard in one of the conference room chairs. "I'm willing." "When?" "We'll schedule you for next week. There's some prep work involved, some medications to increase your stem cell production, but the actual procedure is relatively straightforward. I'll have my nurse call you with all the details." "Will it work?" I asked, because I needed to hear someone say it. "Will it save her?" Dr. Ramirez paused. "There are no guarantees with cancer treatment, Mr. Thompson. But with a match this good, and with Sophie's age and overall health, her odds are significantly better. This is the best possible news we could have gotten." I thanked her, hung up, sat in that conference room for another 10 minutes, just trying to process that I could actually do something. That my bone marrow, the same biological material that had given me height and my father's stubbornness and a predisposition to high cholesterol, was going to save my granddaughter's life. I called Riley. She answered before the first ring finished. "Dad, I'm a match," I said, and my voice cracked. "I'm a match. They're scheduling the donation for next week." She screamed. Actually screamed with joy and relief, and probably a dozen other emotions. Blake was shouting in the background. I could hear them crying, laughing, thanking God and me and the universe. "Dad, you're saving her life," Riley sobbed. "You're literally saving her life." "I'm doing it for Sophie," I said firmly, because I needed her to understand this. "Not for you. Not to fix things between us. For Sophie. Because she's 3 years old and she deserves a chance to grow up." "I know," Riley whispered. "I know. But thank you. Thank you so much." The donation happened the following Tuesday. They pumped me full of medications that made me feel like I had the flu, harvested my bone marrow in a procedure that was less dramatic than I'd imagined, but still uncomfortable as hell, and then told me to go home and rest. Sophie got the transplant 2 days later. I wasn't allowed to be there, something about infection risks and recovery protocols, but Riley sent me updates every hour. The transplant went well. Sophie was stable. Now we wait. Waiting is the worst part of any crisis. You can't do anything except exist in the space between hope and fear, watching the clock and checking your phone and trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. But 3 weeks later, Dr. Ramirez called again. Sophie's body was accepting the transplant. The cancer markers were decreasing. She was going to make it. I cried. Sat in my living room, 50 years old, recently divorced, emotionally exhausted, and cried like I hadn't cried since the day Marlene opened that door in her affair bathrobe. But these were different tears. Relief tears. Gratitude tears. The kind of tears that come when you realize life isn't just disappointment and betrayal. Sometimes it's also second chances and miracles and 3-year-olds who get to grow up because biology decided to cooperate. Claire came over that night. We didn't talk much. Just sat together while I processed that I'd saved a life. That my anger and hurt and bitterness hadn't stopped me from doing the right thing when it mattered most. And somewhere in all of that, I realized something Dr. White had been trying to tell me for months. Hate is heavy, and I'd been carrying it long enough. Years passed. Sophie grew up healthy. Obsessed with dinosaurs, and then soccer, and then whatever teenage girls obsess over. Marlene faded into quiet guilt, occasionally appearing at family events like a ghost of bad decisions past. Gregory? Gone within a year. Turns out distinguished gray hair doesn't pay for much when the girlfriend's divorce settlement left her broke. Riley and I rebuilt something fragile but real. Not what we had before, that was gone forever, but something honest. We bonded over Sophie's school projects and birthday parties. Careful conversations that avoided the past. Then one day, Mrs. Kemp, still kicking at 83, mailed me a package. The old trunk. The one I'd brought that catastrophic Friday. It had been sitting in her garage for a decade. I opened it, laughed at the irony, and gave it to Claire, my second wife. A woman who actually appreciated surprises that didn't involve police. That's revenge done right. Not yelling. Not destroying property. Just living well enough that your ex's name stops being a trigger and becomes a punchline. So yeah, next time someone says surprise her, I say, no thanks. Once was enough.